All right, good morning. We'll get it rocking and rolling. Today we're talking about inspections, deadlines, and disclosures. So the reason we're kind of bringing this up again and talking about it is, we continue to experience situations where it's important to kind of talk about the details. That way, everybody keeps this stuff forefront in their mind and handles situations as best they can. Um, Getting into it, I think, Kong, maybe we should start by talking about just the inspection contingencies, the deadlines, knowing the dates, that sort of thing. I can share my screen here,
Okay,
and then we can get into the nitty gritty.
cool.
Let me
Okay.
hide
Before
the
we
bit.
start, one thing I wanted to mention too is please do not write anything on the last page of the contract, the special clauses. The only thing you really should write in there is a factual statement. For example, buyer is agent. That's a fact, right? There's no if, when, what, where, how to that. It's a fact. So a couple weeks ago, I think I had like three issues, and one of them was a deal I'm involved with for the past 8 months now, and it stemmed from an agent writing something on the last page. Now, mine was from 1992 when an agent decided to write something, and now we're dealing with the repercussions of it. So just please don't write anything on the last page. If you do, talk to me or Brooks or Tim first. If there isn't a form for it, writing house has to appraise is just a very lazy way of not using the or pulling up the form that's already been created for you. So just wanted to preface that before we start so I don't forget. Um, but paragraph 12 is the beginning of the inspection contingencies, the buyer's due diligence inspections. So five things right off the bat, their rights and responsibilities. Okay.
Real quick before we
Yep.
get into that, I think it might be important to read this number 11 here about the waiver, if for
Sure.
some reason.
Waiver of contingencies, paragraph 11. If this agreement is contingent on buyer's right to inspect and or repair the property or to verify insurability, environmental conditions, boundaries, certifications, zoning classifications, or use, or any other information regarding the property, buyer's failure to exercise any of buyer's option within the time set forth in this agreement is a waiver of that contingency, and buyer accepts the property and agrees to the release in paragraph 28 of this agreement. So it's paragraph 11 is telling the buyer, hey, stick to the calendar, because if you don't, you're kind of waiving it. Well, you are waiving it. You're waiving your rights. Okay. Brooks, I don't remember what did we use that for? Because it was something that went over the calendar days or something, and
Yeah, I had a deal recently where the buyer's agent was under the impression that ongoing negotiations basically extended timelines, and that's not the case. If you don't come to a deal within the timeline, it is a waiver of that contingency, and the buyer accepts the property and agrees to release. So you always have to keep that in mind. And even if you know it, don't assume that the buyer's agent knows that.
correct. Um, Paragraph 12, buyer's due diligence and inspections. A, the rights and responsibilities. So here are the five rights and responsibilities. Okay. One, seller will provide access to insurers, representative, and as may be required by this agreement or by mortgage lenders to surveyors, municipal officials, appraisers, and inspectors. In addition, unless otherwise agreed, only parties and their real estate licensees may attend any inspection. So if your buyer's uncle wants to attend, get permission first. Okay. Two, Buyer may make two pre-settlement walkthrough inspections of the property for the limited purpose of determining that the condition of the property is as required by this agreement and any addenda. Buyer's right to these inspections is not waived by any other provisions of this agreement. So we had this conversation before too, Brooks. A buyer is allowed two pre-settlement walkthroughs, right? So does a home inspection count as one of those?
No.
Yeah, these are just walkthrough inspections. Okay. Um, Three, seller will have heating and all utilities, including fuel, on for all inspections and appraisals. So this is kind of important because it's bold. Um, it must have happened too many times. So the attorneys for PAR highlighted this and made it bold so that everybody can see to make it stick out because there's a lot of properties that sit vacant uh, throughout the year, whether they're winterized or whatnot, whatever it is, that has to be, if you're going to do an inspection, make sure the list agent knows that they have to have the utilities on. And if they're not going to, then negotiate that before you put it under contract. Okay. Four, all inspectors, including home inspectors, are authorized by buyer to provide a copy of any inspection report to broker for buyer. Okay. Five, seller has the right upon request to receive a free copy of any inspection report from the party for when it was prepared, unless otherwise stated. Seller does not have the right to receive a copy of any lender's appraisal report. So five is one of those, it's I call it a hidden term of the contract because so many times I get calls from our agents asking, "Hey, Colin, isn't there somewhere in the contract that says my seller can't ask for the appraisal?" And it's right there. Okay. Or, "Hey, we wanted a copy of the home inspection report and the buyer agent's not giving it to us." Well, it's there. You guys already agreed that you're getting a copy. Okay. Uh, B, buyer waives or elects at buyer's expense to have the following inspections, certifications, and investigations, referred to as inspections or inspections, performed by professional contractors, home inspectors, engineers, architects, and other properly licensed or otherwise qualified professionals. All inspections will be non-invasive, okay, unless otherwise agreed in writing. If the same inspector is inspecting more than one system, the inspector must comply with the home inspection law. See paragraph 12D for notices regarding that. One thing to note, non-invasive. What's an example of an invasive inspection? Can anybody mention one?
Cutting open walls to replace a sewage pipe
Like polybutylene?
or PVC or cast iron.
Yeah. Yeah, anything that you have to drill into or tear down a wall or even drive it, right, Tim?
Yes.
That's invasive if you want to do it properly.
Hey,
Okay.
Colin, when you have a finished basement and they're trying to do the wood infestation, that they're not going to open up the wall to check out the for termites.
Yeah, that type of deal.
Like, you can explain the one that we're gonna go through with the drive it right now, where they're probably gonna have to really maybe touch it and get in it to see if it's moist behind the wall.
Yeah, there's
The drive.
we have one listing coming up, and there's a crack, probably as long uh, as I'm tall, right above the window on the exterior, and that just needs to be checked out. We just noticed it when we did our presentation and recommended to the seller. So we were very uh, forthcoming with that and made the seller aware that, hey, this needs to be looked at because whoever buys it will probably have it checked out, and you don't want to deal with that in the middle of the deal. So, yeah. C, for elected inspections, buyer will, within the contingency period stated in 13A, complete inspections, obtain any inspection reports or results, and accept the property, terminate the agreement, or submit a written corrective proposal to the seller according to the terms of paragraph 13B. So before we go on with this paragraph 12, the termination part, I get agents sending to me just to double check to make sure that they're quoting the right paragraph, and they always write in the reason for termination is because of this paragraph, and they always cite paragraph 12, and that's not correct. Okay, paragraph 12 is just talking about the inspections and who's doing what and who can do what. It doesn't allow for the buyer to back out. We'll go into that here a little later, but for the inspections, again, elected or waive, home, wood, water, radon. By the way, what does a radon system cost anymore? Has anybody had one recently installed? Jim?
I think it was about $1,200 Long and Hershey.
Okay.
Yeah.
They haven't gone up that much or at all. Okay. On-lot sewage, property and flood insurance, property boundaries, lead-based paint hazards. Okay. And then blank. So if there's anything else you wanted to get checked. Okay. 13, the contingency period. So this is the paragraph that really talks about the rights of the buyer and the rights of the seller as far as what they can do, if they can terminate the deal, right? So 13 starts off with A. The contingency period is blank days, 10 if not specified, from the execution date of this agreement for each inspection elected in paragraph 12C. Okay? So 10 if it's not marked. Did I get cut off there?
No, you're good.
Okay. So 10 if it's not marked or changed. Usually if you do a septic or a VA water test, right? They call it the full gamut. That's what Jim McGraw calls it. The VA water test can take 10 business days. So you might want to extend that out a little bit from 10 to maybe like 15, 16, 20 even, right? Within the stated contingency period, and as a result of any inspection selected in paragraph 12C, except as stated in paragraph 13C, 1, if the result of the inspection selected in paragraph 12C are satisfactory to buyer, the buyer will present all reports in their entirety to seller, accept the property with the information stated in the report, and agree to the release. Okay, so 1 is they accept the property, the buyer, during the 10 days. 2, if the results of any inspection selected in paragraph 12C are unsatisfactory to buyer, buyer will present all reports in their entirety to the seller and terminate this agreement by written notice to seller with all deposit monies returned to buyer according to the terms of paragraph 26 of this agreement. So 2 is if the buyer just wants to back out during the 10 days. Okay? And that is the paragraph you cite, paragraph, subparagraph, and another subparagraph. 13B2 is what you want to cite on your termination, because it says, 1, the buyer will terminate, and 2, where the deposit goes. You don't ever want to cite a paragraph unless it says buyer will terminate and get their deposit money back. Okay? If you're citing something that says that doesn't say that, that's very iffy if the buyer can even get their deposit back. Okay? So if you're going to terminate, make sure that phrase is in there, that buyer will get their deposit money back. Okay? 3, if the results of any inspection selected in 12C are unsatisfactory to buyer, buyer will present all the reports in their entirety to seller with a written corrective proposal listing corrections and/or credits desired by the buyer. So the proposal may, but is not required to, include the names of the properly licensed or qualified professional to perform the corrections requested in the proposal, provisions for payment, including retests and a projected date for completion of the corrections. Buyers agree that seller will not be held liable for corrections that do not comply with mortgage lender or government requirements if performed in a workmanlike manner according to the terms of the buyer's proposal. A, following the end of the contingency period, so after the 10 days is over, buyer and seller will have blank days, 5 if not specified, for a negotiation period. During the negotiation period, 1, seller will acknowledge in writing seller's agreement to satisfy all the terms of buyer's proposal, or 2, buyer and seller will negotiate another mutually acceptable written agreement providing for any repairs or improvements to the property and or any credit to buyer at settlement as acceptable to the mortgage lender, if any. If seller agrees to satisfy all the terms of buyer's proposal, or buyer and seller enter into a mutually acceptable written agreement, a negotiated agreement, buyer accepts the property and agrees to release, and the negotiation period ends. Brooks, I just caught that. So it says, and the negotiation period ends. So let's say you negotiate, and on day 2, the seller's like, all right, I'm fine with the BRI, let's do the change in terms, right? You guys sign off on the change in terms, both sides. On day 3, you still have 2 days left. I guess, according to this, you can't ask for any more, right?
It certainly reads that way. It'd be nice to have a real estate attorney's opinion on that.
Right.
Say it again, Carl.
Let's say during the negotiation period, Tim, it's 5 days,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
But on day 2, you send over a BRI, right, as a buyer agent to the list agent, and the list agent says, hey, Tim, this looks good to my seller. Send over a change in terms and we'll sign it today. You send them a change in terms, signed. They return it back, signed. We have a executed change in terms. Does that mean the negotiation period now ends? Because that's what it says there. Yeah, that's a iffy one. I hope I never have to argue that one. B, if no mutually acceptable written agreement is reached, or if seller fails to respond during the negotiation period within blank days, 2, if not specified, following the end of the negotiation period, buyer will 1, accept the property, or 2, terminate by written notice to seller with all deposit monies returned to buyer according to the terms of paragraph 26. So that's the other place where you can terminate for the inspection contingency for the buyer is paragraphs 13(3)(b)(2, right? Because it says you can terminate and get your deposit money back. So again, if after the 5 days you can't come to terms with the seller, and it doesn't matter if you're still in the middle of negotiating it or you think you're close, either extend that 5 days, right? Or the buyer has to pick one of these 2 options. They have to accept it or just terminate. Because after the 5 days, you're buying it as is. And it says it in the next paragraph in bold. If buyer and seller do not reach a mutually acceptable written agreement and buyer does not terminate this agreement by written notice to seller within the time allotted in paragraphs 13b3 lowercase b, buyer will accept the property and agree to the release. Ongoing negotiations do not automatically extend the negotiation period. So there you go. It states it kind of, again, in very plain English there. Okay. Yeah, Jim.
This might be a stupid question, Kong, but I, that's by the letter of the contract. But if you have two people that are continuing to negotiate after that point and they both agree to it, as long as it's signed off on, you're still okay, right?
Yeah, and a change in terms to extend the negotiation period.
Right, right. Okay.
hmm Any questions or any issues that have arisen recently?
Well, you might want to bring up the issue that we had where the reply to inspection was given, the change in terms was verbally agreed to, not totally agreed to. And then go ahead if you want to start talking about
Yeah.
how the buyer started using Chat GPT to negotiate his deal on things that weren't even part of the
Yeah.
inspection that was waived.
You're going to see that more and more often now. Um, Buyers or sellers, clients using ChatGPT to negotiate or talk to you about and raise some questions. And the thing I always say is, what does the contract say? Always go back to the contract, right? You can ChatGPT anything in any scenario, but I can tell you that 99% of the times, people don't type in the complete scenario, okay? For example, we had a client recently waived inspections, right? The water test, okay? And then all of a sudden during the negotiation period, they brought up the fact that the well cap was rusted, okay? And by using ChatGPT and just typing in, hey, what are the consequences of a well cap being rusted? Well, ChatGPT came up with potentially there could be contaminated water underneath, and that the seller um, should have disclosed that, and it could be a violation of the contract, et cetera, et cetera. Now, I guarantee you what they didn't type in there was the first thing they should have typed was, I waived the water test. I found later that the exposed well cap, right, which means that they would have had to see it if they walked the property, right? It is now on day 15 of the contingency period, and I would like to bring this up to negotiate. So again, they didn't bring up every detail of the thing. They just bought it to suit their needs. So just be very careful with that. And if you have a problem, again, just come see myself or Brooks or Tim. I think I got that story right, Tim.
Does everybody understand what he said, or are they confused? Just want to make sure, because again, the well inspection was waived, the water test was waived, but then all of a sudden ChatGPT said because the cap was rusted that it was a non-disclosure item, and now they wanted all this inspection work and stuff completed. Well, it turned out the seller, I don't think we got to where it turned out. The seller didn't agree to that stuff. And the buyer was down to his last day and his last 6 hours of terminating and finally signed the termination and got their deposit back. But the buyer was not listening to a word we said in this transaction. They were relying on ChatGPT for everything. And the responses back to our agent that were coming that were written were all copied and pasted from Chat GPT. So it was clearly nothing that this buyer was writing. It was all based on the computer giving the advice as to what he should do. So what we did was we were down to the last, like I said, 6 hours, and we made sure that our agent texted him, called and left a message, emailed them, everything, just so that we could document we did our job to get them to sign this termination. Because if they did not sign that termination by the end of that day, then they would have either had to buy the house as is, or they would have had to um, terminate, if they didn't sign
Yeah.
that agreement or lose their deposit.
Yep.
So,
And
okay.
we kind of had to remember we're still working for the buyer here, so we if they want to terminate, we want to make sure they get their deposit back. So at the same time, we're trying to talk with the list agent and you know outline that, hey, we are in this period of the contract, right? Like I said, always go back to the contract. We're in this part of the contract, and it still has the 2 days for the buyers to terminate or accept the property as is. So we wanted to make sure the list agent knew what day we were on too. So we just provided like a very generic calendar from Microsoft Word and just highlighted day 1, day 2, day 3, day 10, and then negotiation period day 1 through 5, and then the last 2 days. Sometimes
And
you have to.
quite honestly, in that transaction, we kind of lost faith in our buyer that they wouldn't listen to us, that they wanted to listen to ChatGPT. And we just felt that if they couldn't get the inspections that they wanted, we did not care to have them go through with that transaction because they were relying on ChatGPT.
Well, it's
It was better to cut loose now than to be involved in a lawsuit later.
it definitely was a bit of a complicated scenario. And the stuff that this buyer was asking for, could you make it as a listing agent, I don't get offended even if they waive the contingency. Look, in this scenario, they waived the water test contingency. However, further in the agreement of sale, you have the maintenance and loss of risk paragraph that covers stuff that might not have been disclosed. So could you make the argument that, well, the well cap was rusted, you didn't disclose any problems with the water. I want to make sure that this is in the same disclosed state that I entered this agreement into with. Probably. But an important piece of that whole scenario is that we did, represent our buyer, send his requests over to that listing agent. Um, in going back to not being offended as the listing agent, I think that that guy did a great job of presenting the information to his seller and not taking offense to it and just simply let's say no, we're not willing to, do any of this stuff. And we put those responses, that communication back in the hands of our buyer um, in PDF form in a DocuSign along with his options and spelled out timelines and said, "Hey, look, if you don't terminate this agreement, you're at risk of losing your deposit here tonight." So our agent did a great job of covering themselves and the company and their buyer all at the same time. So
Yep.
it definitely was a tricky scenario.
Yep.
Very tricky. So,
As far as it not only was tricky, it was stressful
Sure.
on everybody. So, which leads us to disclosures. Okay. Again, what Brooks just pointed out there real quick and what we talked about was that well cap was in the same condition it was the day they entered into the contract. Now, our question or a thing that I'm going to request is we have to make sure we are reading every line on that disclosure before we allow a buyer or a seller to sign. And if I asked, does everybody do that? And if we were honest with ourselves, we probably would say no, if we were honest. But we have to be better. We have to be better. We have to make sure that if there is something not filled out or there's something that is checked, that there's no explanation with the check. That's what we have to be more careful of is if there was a check mark that there was a problem in the past and there was no explanation, we need to know about that. If there's a check mark that there's a bankruptcy, we need to find out about that because anybody that's been involved in bankruptcies understands and knows that if somebody's in bankruptcy, you need court approval to sell the property, court approval to pay the commission, and court approval to execute and agree to the sale that's presented. So again, I'm asking everybody to read, question, ask questions, and if you are curious or nervous or don't know what to do, come talk to us because I'm not saying that Kong and Brooks and I know it all because we certainly don't. But we put our three heads together, we think about it. Kong has a great relationship with not ChatGPT, but the legal hotline now. He's our go-to guy with the legal
They
hotline.
actually appreciate it because I type everything out and then read it, so it's not,
Right.
it's not just rambling.
And are you typing it out through ChatGPT also, Kong, to help
No, well,
attorneys?
sometimes because I'll say, can you write this so I can read it in 45 seconds?
Okay.
But I don't want to miss any points, right? You got to give them all the facts. Like, you can't just call them up and say one thing, but then you left out the fact that, oh, we waived this, or the well cap is exposed and it's in like 3 photos on Bright, right?
Yeah. So basically, all we're trying to tell you is what we're giving you here today are scenarios that we've been going through lately with agents, trying to get them in and out of pickles. Um, we did discuss, I think, on the previous call about one um, where we had a hard time getting the deposit back. And I think we just finally did get that deposit back here recently. And it was a long fight for it. But our agent was able to get the money back for the buyer. So,
And that was thanks to our agent putting in, who our agent represented the buyer, put in that the deposit, if it's disputed and unresolved for 20 days, not 180, but for 20 days, the buyer can request on day 21, and the broker has to return it within the next 30 days. So that
yep,
that was a very veteran move.
That was
yep.
actually going to be my question on that. What is undisputed? What does that mean? Because I changed it to 30 days, but I'm curious like what undisputed
Disputed.
means.
Yeah, that means like nobody can sign off on the release. Nobody wants to sign off on the release.
But if they're still like, I mean, what does that mean? So if somebody emails back and says, I'm not giving it to you, but it's nothing
So,
signed saying that, like they're back and forth, is that like, what does that entail?
yeah, so
Okay, hold on one second. Kung, if you can elaborate on that a little bit more
yeah,
in the sense that we had got a threatening letter from an attorney on that particular case, but there was no action taken for mediation. So I think when you're talking about this undisputed, and to answer Morgan's question, if you could point out in the agreement where it says that, Brooks, if you can
Yeah,
pull
I
that
got
paragraph
you.
about they can threaten you, but if they don't take you to mediation and file, that broker, the other broker we were involved with Keller Williams actually was, or the company, we kind of forced their hand because we were all in receipt of a letter, but we weren't in receipt of actual legal action. So,
Yeah.
elaborate on that if you can, please.
All right. So if the deal goes bad and a buyer, let's say, terminates it and wants their deposit back, and the seller says, "No, I think you lied or something. I'm not giving you the deposit back. Okay, I want the deposit." So neither side is agreeing to where the money goes. Okay, so Part C here, 26C, buyer and seller agree that if there is a dispute over the entitlement of deposit monies that is unresolved, okay, meaning nobody can come to an agreement, for blank days, 180 if not specified, after the settlement date stated in paragraph 14A or any extensions, or following termination of the agreement, whichever is earlier. So in this case, I think settlement was like for middle of June, and the buyer terminated somewhere in like the end of May, middle of May. So middle of May was earlier, right? So we used that date.
Beginning of May.
Yeah, counted from 21 days from there. So or 20 days from there. And on day 21, we had the buyer write a letter asking for the deposit money back. Okay? So whether or not you agree on where the money goes or not, it doesn't matter. What matters is in the contract that is executed, we all agreed, buyer and seller, that if there is a dispute for X amount of days, after that amount of days, we agreed in writing that the money will go back to the buyer at their request within the next 30 days.
So when did we receive the letter from the attorney?
Yeah, so let me read further down here. Okay.
I think the letter came
Following
after
termination,
20 days.
Following the termination agreement, whichever is earlier, then the broker holding the deposit monies will, within 30 days of receipt of buyer's written request, distribute the deposit monies to buyer unless the broker holding the money is in receipt of verifiable written notice that the dispute is subject of litigation or mediation. If broker has received verifiable written notice of litigation or mediation prior to the receipt of buyer's request for distribution, broker will continue to hold the deposit monies until receipt of written distribution agreement between buyer and seller or final court order. So on day 21, we got nothing from the other side stating that, hey, the seller filed for mediation or litigation. All we got was a nasty letter from an attorney, which after talking to the PAR hotline, I told them, I said I received a letter. I laid out the scenario for them, and they said a threat of future litigation or mediation is not written notice that it has already occurred. So with that, that's how we were able to get the deposit back in this case.
Plus, that letter did come after day 20, didn't it?
It can't. Well, they must have known, Tim, because it was sent on a Sunday, and Monday was day 20.
Okay.
Yep. And I took the letter and read it to the PAR hotline while I was on the phone with them, and they said, they actually didn't really answer me, but they said, read this article that we wrote 5 years ago from Hank Lerner. And I read it, and specifically in there, he wrote a threat, a future threat a threat of future litigation or mediation is not verifiable proof that it's ongoing.
May I comment about this, please, since it
Yeah.
involves me? Um, just because you get a letter from an attorney, and if you know the arrogance of attorneys, they always think they're right, and general chances are they haven't even read the contract. Okay, just because you get a letter from an attorney threatening potential litigation doesn't make them right. Okay, I have to give credit to our office, to Kong, to Brooks, to Tim, for reading the contract and understanding the contract and knowing that because they have interpreted it correctly, we were right and we're going to get, as long as we followed course and just kept our mouths shut, that the buyer would prevail and get the money back, which they did. And I truly appreciate that, for getting that done.
Yeah, Joe, I'm glad you came and talked to us about it because when we sat down and looked at it, and yeah, the story could have went either way, right? You can see the seller side, you can see the buyer side, right? But when I saw that 20 days, I was like, let's just keep our heads down, don't say a word, and then on day 21, bam, we'll hit them with this.
And so the
But Kong,
lesson learned is do not stick with 180 days. Make that timeline as short as possible, because a lot of times the listing agent, if they're not doing a lot of business, won't even look at that and understand that is important. And also, do not write anything on the last page.
But
but
Joe, it also depends on who you represent. If you represent the seller, you don't want to see 20 days. You want to see,
Correct. Well, from a buyer's point of view.
yeah,
From a
right?
buyer's point of view.
You want to see at least enough time to give your seller enough time to if they want to file the mediation or hold the deposit hostage.
Right.
but even if you receive an offer that has 20 days, 10 days, 15 days, I mean, if the seller truly is pissed off and wants that deposit, then they need to act, and you need to act on their behalf by at least getting the paperwork signed for the mediation.
Right.
But I think in that particular case too, didn't you also semi-educate the other brokerage as to their liabilities is reference to making sure they return that deposit?
Yeah, we just wrote again. The attorney kept saying, "No, you're not releasing it." No, but there was nothing factual and based off of the contract. And every time I responded to the attorney, I just kept saying, "This is what they both agreed to in writing in the contract." I'm going back to the contract and what was agreed upon. Okay, if there was a dispute, they agreed that on day 21, the buyer will get their deposit money back in the next 30 days. So, I kept repeating that we're going back to the contract, and I even highlighted everything. I laid out a generic calendar like I always do, and just circled day 1, day 2, day 3, so that everybody knew where they stood. And I even put in there that the broker's unwillingness to release the deposit to buyer could result in a visit from the commission.
Yeah. Well, you did a great job, Kong, and I thank you for that because you really,
It's just going back to it's. I'll tell you what, Tim. My life is so much simpler now because all I do is just say, what does the contract say? What does it say in the contract?
right.
Instead of trying to argue your points or whatever, just go back to the contract. We agreed to it. It's in writing. That's what we're here for, is to make sure this contract goes through the way it was written.
Yeah.
So,
Well, guys, thank you for this call. Hopefully it was helpful. Morgan, did that help answer the
yeah, did
undisputed?
that help you, Morgan?
Yeah, that's good. I was just curious on that with the letters.
Yeah.
Yeah. But and again, Kong and Brooks, you guys are doing a great job with handling these issues for the agents. I really appreciate the effort that you put in for that. And thank you for bringing this stuff up on the call. And if anybody has any questions, comments, other than that, we'll see you next time. I think what next weekend or next week is 4th of July. And no, it's not till that next Saturday. So we'll see if we can come up with a topic for next week or go every couple weeks.
Hey,
All
just
right.
before we get off, I just want to remind everybody that we have the ice cream social coming up on July 22nd. I have the postcards here. I know a lot of agents have been stopping to pick them up. I wanted to make sure it was the 22nd. Yeah. So stop in and get these, or I keep sending the emails, send the emails out, share it on Facebook, whatever you want to do. The golf tournament is August 15th. I did start sending the email out, but if you guys could help and start getting teams together, we've already had some responses, so I appreciate that. And that's it for now.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, everybody. We'll see you soon.